everyone, Kelfecil here, and welcome to another episode of The Adventure Writer, where we discuss narrative design topics in ttrpgs, and a few other topics here and there. So, first of all, a disclaimer, I am not the end-all be-all expert on the matter, so I'm just here to offer my own opinions, my own methods and approaches on various matters that concern narrative design. So with that out of the way, let's talk about today's topic. Dungeon crawls in ttrpgs. Now, I will be explaining my method and approach to making a dungeon crawl so that it becomes something actually fun, and I will say actually fun because, at least from my point of view, dungeon crawls are notoriously boring, I would say, in ttrpgs. And that's for many different reasons. At least from my perspective, the reasons are that they're usually made to be hard, they are usually bland and without any story, and I could say you could switch it up with any system and the whole point of it ends up being basically just rolling dice and smacking things. So in order to kind of like see it from a different perspective, I will say that I'm a narrative designer first and a game designer second. I will try to approach this whole thing from a more narrative heavy kind of perspective, and I will show you how I usually make dungeon crawls to try and make them fun for my players. Now, with that in mind, I will be giving you examples based on various famous dungeon crawls, be it in ttrpgs, in board games, video games. It will be different things here and there, and we'll try to dissect these things. Well, not dissect, but take some examples, take some things that they do well, and try to transport them and transform them in a way for our own use in ttrpgs, for our own campaigns, basically. In the end, I will also explain how I went about creating one of my favorite dungeon crawls, which is the Frozen Laboratory, which was a collaboration release that we made with Venatus Maps. Shout out to Tyler here for the amazing map that he made, the amazing dungeon crawl map that he made for that release. But we'll get back to that later. So, let's get started. First things first, why are you making a dungeon crawl in the first place? So you have to answer this question before you get excited, before you get all excited and start filling up room by room with booby traps and terrible monsters that your players will have to face or find and get killed by. A dungeon crawl can be a nice pause in between more heavy narrative points in your campaign, or it could be a one-shot where it's just all about the players testing their powers and their prowess in combat, or even their tactical skills. It could be very intricate if you want to make it more difficult in that way. Or it can even be just a smash and grab, a shoot and loot, hack and slash kind of like, situation where it's all about just killing things and just for fun, just rolling dice, basically. You will have sessions that are like that. That is definitely something that happens. Every campaign needs it now and then, and that is no shame. That is not the DM, or the GM being lazy or anything like that. It's just fun sometimes. So with that in mind, I would say that it could be something more connected to what your players already care about. So for example, making a dungeon crawl can end up disconnecting your players from the main story as much as a random dragon dropping out of nowhere to basically attack them. So if you don't have a good reason for actually making the dungeon crawl in the first place and actually putting it in your story, in between even your story or what is happening in the story, then maybe it shouldn't even be there from the beginning. So you need to find good reasons for the dungeon crawl to even exist in the first place. And no, the dungeon crawl cannot be just a layer of a body. That's not just good enough. And no, the dungeon crawl cannot be just a place where the players just find something valuable. You cannot just make these very simple reasons just to make a dungeon crawl. Try to find more connecting story elements, more connecting reasons as to why the players should even be there in the first place. So how do you do this? How do you connect it? Because it's good to ask all these questions, but you do want some answers, right? Well, let's take a bandit on the run, for example. Would he hide in a dungeon? No, I don't think he would. He would try, but maybe he would be taken captive by another bigger bandit clan because of what he has done or what he knows. So that's already a good enough reason to have the dungeon crawl be a thing where the players kind of meet up with this new bandit clan and they have to deal with it. Could be through roleplay, could be through actual combat. So let's say a rogue mage is wanted for conducting crazy magical experiments, and his whole dungeon in that case, if you're going to confront him in whatever that may be, a dungeon or a wizard tower or something like that, then the whole thing should be filled up with things that are relevant to this whole chase, that they are actually things that the wizard has created, maybe some abominations or some elementals that he conjured out of nowhere, some experiments gone wrong or something. The dungeon crawl in that case has meaning, it has a reason to be there, and it has something thematic that the players are interested in. It's not just random monsters, it's not just bandits after bandits in each every other room. There is a reason for the players to be going through this dungeon crawl. So for example, the players could also be looking for an item. If it's going to be hidden somewhere, then you could attach a whole new story to the item. And it doesn't have to be just a dungeon crawl, it could be a whole story that kind of leads them through a dungeon crawl as well. And it's not going to be something that you already know about. It could be something completely new for the players as well. So in this case, they would have to fully understand it and grasp the importance of the place around them, not just the fact that there is an item there. So in that case, like for example, a key could be lost in the sewers, where a cult has been waiting for a sign to commence their offense on the surface or something, to bring their secret god or something like that. Or maybe a sacred sword is forgotten inside a tomb of knights that were all cursed and left to walk the realm of mortals until their oath is already fulfilled. But yeah, what I'm trying to say here is that if your players are not intrigued by the place that you have brought them to, like by the actual dungeon crawl, they are not perplexed about who they are and what the place they have stumbled upon is exactly, then if they are not already asking questions from the very first room, then you should definitely change something about the story or what you are doing with the dungeon crawl itself. So you could start adding things into it in order to bring more flavor and meaning to that dungeon crawl. So a few examples now. I will start with an actual TTRPG example, and I will talk about the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. That is an official Wizards of the Coast adventure, and I will tell you what it did well and what it did not do well. Again, in my opinion, but still. So the thing that it did well was basically that there were a lot of rooms that had like little stories in them that would actually hook the players and get them involved in something interesting. For example, they would start talking to an NPC that they find in a room that is not hostile, or could be hostile, but not yet at least, is not hostile yet. And they would start realizing that there is a whole other thing going on behind this NPC. Like, it's not just the overarching story of the Dungeon of the Mad Mage himself, but there is something going on with this NPC and how they're involved in this kind of situation. So that was very interesting and very cool. But this is connected to what it does not do well. It was, in my opinion at least, too large. Yes, that is something that was very appealing to a lot of players, and they loved the fact that you had so many layers of the dungeon and all that. There were so many different rooms that you were just constantly exploring the dungeon. It was like a huge dungeon crawl. But it felt that because of all these little stories, they started feeling so disconnected and so weird, and we got so many random things, so many random lore bits, that in the end they started feeling just unnecessary and not connected to the main story in any way. The larger narrative was not always there. And I'm not saying it has to always be there. Of course, you're gonna have like, some moments of respite and like, kind of like see some fun story on the side, which is really cool. That's a very nice way of writing things. But when you start losing the attention of your own players, like if the players are in the dungeon and they completely forget by the 10th room why they're even there, then you have an issue with like the way that you're connecting things. Now, the next example that I want to talk about is a board game example, and I will talk about Massive Darkness 2. This is a board game a dungeon crawl board game, that a lot of people, a lot of reviewers that I actually follow have said is their favorite dungeon crawler, and I will basically jump on the bandwagon and I will say it is my favorite dungeon crawler as well. It is absolutely fantastic for many different reasons, but we're not here to talk about that. What it did well was that it focused on the fact that the players can have fun by playing their own special class, their own different abilities, and they basically all did the same thing more or less. They just killed stuff in the dungeon, just roamed around, looted, and just killed stuff, but they did it in their own way. So the asymmetrical classes and the way that they play was super interesting, and it all just came together really nicely to make every player feel different and feel special while doing somewhat the same thing in a cooperative manner. And on top of that, there were also a lot of other really nice small mechanics added to each scenario that made the game feel just so different every time you played it. Even though you were playing somewhat the same thing, like just killing more and more monsters, the moment you entered a new scenario and you read the special rule for it, for example, you had to carry a cursed sword, and if you carry it for too long, you lose the scenario, so you have to pass it to each other. Or there could be like, special summoning portals, or there could be things that you need to collect and throw them on the boss before you can damage him. The smallest of mechanics, the smallest of differences in how things work, made each scenario special and made everybody have to think in a different manner. So this is something that we can also take in TTRPGs, and I will explain about that in a bit. So the thing that I think it did not do well is that Massive Darkness was trying really hard for certain monsters to be unique, but it didn't achieve that. There are way too many monsters, and the way that it works with the whole roaming monster and the whole kind of like mob spawning out of nowhere, although it was cool, and if you have like a lot of content, you can actually have like tons of variety in it. There were some situations where, we were fighting in heaven, and instead of like, seeing corrupted angels or like demons or something attacking, we were seeing like pixies and like orc flayers, which of course it's cool, as I said, because of the variety, and you get to fight different things with different abilities, but you get my point. The narrative is kind of broken there. So that was kind of an issue, that was kind of like a thing that was sacrificed for the sake of more variety and more mechanics, and yeah, just variety. I will just leave it at that. So dungeon crawling board games in general, what they do well is that they do the hack and slashing thing like really well, because you can focus on very simple mechanics as rolling like dice instead of having to know the whole 5th edition rules in order to play. You just need to roll like a specific amount of dice or know the specific rules for the board game, which are way easier than knowing a whole tabletop role-playing game, and they just allow you to just hack and slash stuff. And what they try to do well rarely works, which is basically the story. There's a lot of games out there that have like a whole book, a whole like, you know, scenario book with like different things, and you read like, you know, passages and like dialogues and whatnot. It can be cool, but you know, it kind of breaks the whole thing because you're there to play a board game, you're not there to read a book. There are a few games that do that well. There's a lot of like narrative reading, such as with the Foreteller app, where you have actual professional voice actors actually narrating the whole thing, which is fantastic. Not being paid in any way whatsoever to advertise Foreteller, by the way. It's a fantastic application. So the story is more important in TTRPGs. That's what I'm trying to get to. You don't play TTRPGs in order to just roll dice. If you wanted to roll dice, I would say, at least from my personal opinion and my experience, you should play a board game, because board games do that way better. And if you really want to just kill stuff and just like, you know, enjoy the moment that things die and like, you know, they drop loot like, you know, by the dozens, then play a video game. Because in video games, it is made the easiest, and all you have to do is just press left click in most of those games. So yeah, obviously you use different abilities and whatnot, it becomes more intricate, but you get my point. You don't have to like think about all these extra rules, you just press the button, things get calculated, and you kill the thing. So dungeon crawlers have like a level of interactivity involved in them, like when it comes to TTRPGs. So I would say video games, then board games, then TTRPGs. So TTRPGs tend to focus more on the story. So if you don't have like an overarching story that connects with a dungeon crawl, then why is the dungeon crawl even there? For that reason, I'd say that it is important that we understand the differences between video games and TTRPGs. And I know it is silly to say that, but basically because it is self-explanatory, in my opinion at least. If I had a dime for each time I heard a GM say, oh yeah, I made this super difficult dungeon crawl for my players, I would be a very rich, sad person, knowing that there's so many players suffering in badly designed dungeon crawls. Now the thing is, we need to focus on making the dungeon crawl something fun. So with that in mind, I will talk now about the dungeon crawl that I've designed in the past. Well, one of the many dungeon crawls that I've designed in the past, and specifically the Frozen Laboratory, which is, in this case, only a 4-rooms only dungeon crawl. And I know that's ridiculous, right? Because you would think dungeon crawl, you're already thinking like, oh, it has like tons of rooms and you go like, you know, through corridors and stuff and here and there. Well, I've designed a lot of dungeon crawls, and this is my favorite, or at least one of my favorites, for a reason. So why was I even thinking making a tiny thing like that and calling it a dungeon crawl, right? Well, it has all the important things to make it interesting. So let's begin with the important stuff. It has a backstory to give players a reason to even want to visit it. And in this case, it's a tragic story of a lab that got lost in time and it got frozen, and now that the frost has basically melted away, it's now available for exploration again, so people want to find out what happened. It has a game mechanic that persists throughout the whole dungeon, and that is very important, by the way. This is actually something that I learned from designs in video games a lot. And there's a lot of designers that have learned to do that better over time, and it is evident if you were to look closely in certain video games. So in this case, for example, I would mention Destiny 2, where each raid has like a core mechanic and some kind of gimmick that the players need to learn and basically practice it through the first few encounters before they are called to perform it perfectly if they want to defeat the final boss. So you have like, you know, let's say like, you know, a whole mechanic with destroying crystals, and the crystals give you a certain buff that you use to do like some kind of like special thing in order to be able to damage something. So you learn that through the first few encounters. You're asked to do it in different ways in order to understand it, and then in the final boss, those crystals appear again, and you have to do it perfectly if you want to really defeat that boss. So that's really interesting, and basically it's not only Destiny 2, a lot of games do that. So for example, like World of Warcraft has a lot of dungeons like that where they have like a specific mechanic that kind of appears over time in the raid. But it's just a really cool thing to have that gives the players the feeling that they're in a special place that has its own special rules. Now, on top of that, a third thing that you could add is special monsters and NPCs, of course, that make the place feel special and make it feel like, hey, these special things that we have only seen here, these like unique monsters, belong here. They are basically, in the case of Frozen Laboratory, it was some deactivated guard bots and even an alarm surveillance kind of like android that roamed the place and became activated when it spotted intruders. So this kind of thing you wouldn't see outside of the laboratory. You wouldn't see like, roaming bots and stuff like that, or like, with like surveillance systems and whatnot. Then last but not least, you need to have a fun and interesting boss fight. I wouldn't say it always needs to be a boss fight. You could have like a whole kind of encounter with magical things happening and you have to like solve a big puzzle or something. I do love puzzles and I do think that you can basically replace a boss with them. But in the case that you add a boss, you should definitely play into the special mechanic that I mentioned in region number 2, because if you have already built up this whole thing of like this mechanic being important in the dungeon crawl, then the players will know what to do. They will instinctively know where to go and what to do, how to deal with the situation. And that is what makes it fun, because you're giving them the opportunity to feel smart and feel like capable adventurers. Hey, we learned from all this, we know how to deal with this, or at least we will figure out, while we smash our heads against the wall. But that's basically it. That's the idea of like the Frozen Laboratory. Now, a few things that I added to my dungeon crawl to Frozen Laboratory in order to make it a little bit special, a little bit more special actually, to add extra flavor to it, where I added a cool puzzle that had basically the main mechanic of the dungeon crawl, which was basically with different kind of like colored fumes and stuff like that. An interesting NPC that ended up being friendly for reasons that, you need to play the dungeon crawl to see why. And last but not least, I had an encounter/scene where the players have to basically, after they've defeated the last boss, they have to basically escape while everything is just collapsing behind them. So they need to run really fast. It's kind of like a timed event, let's say. So all these things smashed together, one way or another, a little bit less of this, a little bit more of that, whatever you prefer, basically make for a nice dungeon crawl. At least, again, in my opinion. I do believe that the story needs to be front and center when you're doing something like that. There's a lot of people that actually love combat in ttrpgs, and there's a lot of people that don't. Trying to find the balance between two is something that you're constantly fighting to basically perfect as a GM. When you're making a dungeon crawl, this is no different. And if you're just making a dungeon crawl for the sake of making a dungeon crawl, you're just gonna end up having more combat than anything else, which is why you need to really focus on the things that, at least some of the things that I mentioned, if you want to try and balance it better. Anyway, so with that in mind, this is pretty much all for today. I believe I have shared as much as I could on designing interesting dungeon crawls, and I hope you found it interesting. And yeah, at least for the duration of one YouTube episode, I think that's as much as I can tell you. I hope you found it informative, and if you would like to hear more on dungeon crawls or anything else really, just feel free to leave a comment and ask for it. I would gladly love to hear about it, read about it, and I love reading basically feedback and all other kind of like, requests that you might have for more content in the future. I love talking about narrative design, as you can see, so feel free to recommend something new. So that's all for today, and if you like this video, it would help greatly if you could click the little thumbs up button below the video. And if you're interested in learning more about narrative design and game design in ttrpgs, and maybe other topics that I discuss here, then feel free to subscribe, because I will be releasing more and more videos as the weeks pass. And if you'd like to support me, then you will be happy to know that I also run a Patreon page with new and exclusive ttrpg content releasing every month. So yeah, until next time, may Starlight guide your way, my friends, and bye-bye!